All right, let's talk about this draw model tool that I made. So this is what the file looks like when you first open it up. It's just got a bunch of examples. All of these were made with the same geometry node setup right here. So they're all going to have the same options. And mainly what makes them look different is the different modes right here, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But the only thing that wasn't made with that is this Suzanne model over here, which is just a thing that I left in there for testing. So before getting into it, let's talk about how to bring this into your other files. So we have things like the asset browser, and we have appending. So for the asset browser, you can go to Edit, Preferences, go to File Paths, and then you should have your asset libraries right here. Yours might be blank if you haven't used this. If yours isn't blank, you can just select one and see the file path. You can click this to open it, and you can basically just drop this blend file that you get. You can drop it into that folder right there, and then the assets should appear in your asset library. Or you can add a new one by clicking this plus button, then just go to the folder that has this blend file in it, the draw model tool, which I am already in, and then you do add asset library, and then you can double click to change the asset library name and stuff. Then go to Save Preferences right here, just so that it doesn't get reset when you close without saving or whatever. And that's it. Then you should be able to, by the way, there are some directions in here, but you should be able to open up the asset browser, then go to All Libraries, and I have it in here, Draw Model Tool. Okay, and then we have, a bunch of these objects right here that have some default settings for different modes and stuff. So we have the draw blob and the extrude, the little house. We have the flower, which is flat. Grease pencil, we have this little guy right here. And we have some strokes and things like that. But we also have this, which is just a node setup. You can drag and drop this onto a curve or a grease pencil, and it will add this modifier. And then we have the GP to mesh, which is a way to take something made with grease pencil and turn it into a mesh, which Blender just doesn't have a good way of doing that. You can't right click and convert it to a mesh, whereas you can with a curve. So this is my sort of solution, my workaround for that. And I'll talk about that a little later when I start talking about grease pencil stuff, which will be towards the end. If you want to jump ahead, you can just look at the timestamps and, jump ahead if you want, jump all around, whatever. Okay, so instead of showing how to append in here, let's go into a new file. So we can go to File, New. Like I said before, you can open up the asset browser right here, and then All Libraries, we have Draw Model Tool, and you can just drag and drop these in, or drag this onto a curve, which I don't have yet, but I'll do that in a second. Let's go to append. You go to File, Append, and then you just want to find the blend file, the draw model blend file. So mine is over here, and here is the blend file. You can just double click it. You can either append all of these default or template sort of objects. You can go to Collection, Draw Model Assets, or you can go to Node Tree, and then you have the draw model tool and the grease pencil to mesh in here, and you can append those also. I am not going to append them, but that's how you do it. Okay, so let's use some of these assets by first adding in a curve. You can also add in a grease pencil if you want, but like I said, I'll talk about that towards the end. Check the timestamps. So go to curve. I'll just add in a Bezier curve right here, and we can just drag this, click and drag on top. And now when we select it and go to the modifiers, you can see it right here. I'm just going to close the asset browser, join down, like that. Okay, so before talking about all the different modes, which I'll do in a minute, I'm just gonna go over some curve drawing tips, because a lot of you might not know all of these options in here. So tab to go into edit mode, and then we have this tool panel over here, and you want to select the draw tool, and then you will be able to draw stuff like that. If you don't see this, press T and it will open it up, or you can pull this little arrow right there. But yeah, you can hover over, we have the draw tool, and this is what it was on before, was the selection tool. Okay, so I'm going to select everything with A, X to delete, and I'm just going to draw just a blobby shape or whatever. And I'm going to draw a second one as well. And so to deselect, you can press Alt A to deselect everything. Now, if you want to select something, you can select a whole curve by hovering over one of the points and pressing L like that. And I believe if you press L again, it will select another thing on top of what you already selected. Shift L deselects. And then you can move it around with G or R, S, all the usual Blender things. We also have these options up here, mean radius and mean tilt, and we will use these sometimes for certain things. We also have this option up here for switch direction, which every curve has a direction, and sometimes that will like change how things act. So just know that there's the switch direction option up here. We also have different settings for drawing the curve. We have cursor, which is going to use the cursor for the depth. So you can see I just was in front orthographic view and they drew kind of like on the same plane, but we can move the cursor with shift and right click. And now if we switch back and draw from the front, you can see it's using this for the depth now and it's way back there. And if you want to move this back instead of just trying to guess with shift right click, because it's going to end up in a weird spot, you can press shift S and we have cursor to world origin like that. We also have the surface mode, and this is good for if you want to draw like on the surface of an object. So I could like draw, on here and it's going to attach it on the surface instead of, at the cursor. Now, because I'm using the pillow mode, it's going to like look a little different unless I turn on separate strokes, and then you can see it is actually like on the surface. But this is really nice for if you want to draw something like onto walls or on top of other models and things like that. So just keep in mind that we have these two options up here. There are some other things in here you can test out. Sometimes I'll use only first, but I'm not going to go over all of that because this is not really about that. Now let's talk about all of these different modes right here. So again, I'll just draw like a blobby shape, and I'm going to turn on material preview. By default, I have this material set to everything called random per island, and it's basically going to take anything that is separated and give it a different color. And if you merge them together, let's see, if I turn off separate strokes and merge them together, you can see that when they're connected, they will turn the same color. All right, so let's check all of these different modes. So we have pillow, which is like the one at the very top that I like to use. Also, we have, choose the different type of object you're using. So we have curve, which is what this is, or grease pencil, which I'll talk about later. But pillow mode is basically going to check the distance to the curve that you drew, and it's going to base the thickness off of that. So like the further away from this curve, the thicker it will be. So when you draw like bigger objects right here, or bigger sort of like loops, it's going to get thicker towards the middle of them. And I thought of this as if you're like cutting this shape out with fabric and trying to like stuff it like it's a pillow. And it's just like a kind of memorable name for me. Similar to like how Paint 3D made stuff, except you have a bunch of different options for like voxel size and stuff to change the detail amount and things like that. But yeah, that's how pillow works. And you can see also that this is highlighted, which means that there are options in here that you can use with this mode. That's a thing that's new to 4.4. So if you're using 4.3, you won't notice things getting like grayed out like that. But yeah, let's change this to extrude, which is, it's pretty easy to tell what's going on. It took the shape that you drew and then it's extruding it. And you can see we have a bunch of options in here also. The options that aren't in any, in a menu, they're things that are like kind of shared between a lot of different modes. So I just kept them at the top. Even these ones that are grayed out, if you like remesh it, then you have these options now. So they are kind of used among all the different modes. Then we have stroke, which is just taking the stroke that you drew and giving it thickness. And again, we have the remesh option right here, which is going to make it so that the blobby remeshed curve can like connect to things. You can get some really interesting results with that. And it looks pretty low resolution right now, but there are ways around that too. Like you can change the voxel size to make the voxel size lower, and it will get a lot smoother. We also have the smoothness option right here. And if you want to reset any of these to their default values, you just hover over them and press backspace, and it will set to, what it was before. Then we have pillow and stroke, which is pretty much just combining the pillow settings with the stroke. So you have both, and this can be pretty nice for things that you want to sort of like have an outline in a more like cartoony style. And if I turn the material back on, you can see because they're all different things that aren't connected and like merging together, they all have a different color. I really like the random per island kind of just for like debugging and telling, it's like easier to understand what is connected and what isn't, and you can always change this later. Then we have flat and stroke, which is just filling in the shape with like an n-gon and then putting the stroke around it. And then we have just flat, which is just taking the stroke that you drew and turning it into an n-gon. So even in wireframe mode, you don't see a bunch of triangulation because this is just an n-gon. Once you convert it into a mesh, you can triangulate it and, fill it with quads and, fix it up. And it might not seem like this is very useful immediately, but I actually used this in my recent animation called I Come in P. It's on my channel. It's like the most recent video on there right now. And I used this to draw some leaves really fast. And I'm going to be using my mouse for this. I have a tablet, but this is just like easier to record this way. I drew like all of the plants and the grass and the mountains and like leaves and stuff like that. So, you can come up with things pretty quickly. And if you spend more time on it than I do, like I just did in real time, then you can make something even better. And then if you want, you can just like convert it to a mesh, and then you can do whatever you want in edit mode, like whether you want to use like a grid fill, or you can just use the knife tool to sort of like cut it across like that. And then it will make it easier to, let's like use proportional editing and just like rotate this whole thing. And now you have like a leaf. You can always add more loops in here to make it even better because it is pretty janky. But like I said, this is just like a quick demo. That's something you could do with it. Okay, so let's talk more about the pillow tool now, or the pillow mode. So one thing you might notice immediately if you're used to not paying attention to like the units is that if you draw something really big, it's not gonna appear. And that is because I built in this system that tries to help prevent Blender from crashing. So if it would be like too expensive and be really slow, then it just deletes it instead. And you can see that there is a warning down here, and it says, to prevent Blender crashing, turn voxel size up or accuracy down. So it tells you exactly what you need to do. We have voxel size right here, and you can just turn it up to something bigger, like 1, maybe 2, let's see. 2 seems like it's gonna work, but it's still pretty slow. So yeah, you can turn voxel size up, and then under the pillow menu, we have accuracy right here. And we also have the option to, delete to prevent crashing is turned on automatically. If you want it to just keep trying, even if it crashes, you can just turn this off. But I thought it would be good by default for people who don't have like fast CPUs. You can also change the tolerance. So if you want, if you think your computer can handle it when it is deleting, then you can turn this up, or you could turn it down to something lower. I'll turn it down to just like 5 or whatever, and then it gets deleted. So let's see when I scale it down. So it starts working around here now. But if I turn it up to like 150, then it will let me get it bigger instead of deleting. So yeah, like I said, I just tried to add this in here to help it prevent crashes on people. But basically what you should keep in mind is that the scale that you're drawing things does matter, because the voxel size is like related to the world scale. And each of these squares is 1 meter. So like a human person is typically like under 2 meters. So, drawing something like this is like human sized right here. And you can even check that by exiting and looking at the dimensions right here. You can see it's 1.66 meters tall. But yeah, so if it's not appearing, draw it smaller, change the voxel size, or change the accuracy. Now you can see what the voxel size does. If I go into wireframe mode and I start turning this up, you can see that like the rectangles start getting bigger, and it's basically just going to make it so it's not as detailed, but it will be faster. Or you can make it more detailed by making this smaller, but at a certain point it will get pretty dense and either crash or like get deleted. And like I said before, if you change this, you want to set it back to the default, you hover over it and press backspace. Then we have adaptivity, which is just sort of like a built-in remeshing thing that Blender has, where it tries to like limit the amount of faces. So you can use this to like lower the resolution, I guess. But honestly, I might get rid of this later on because I feel like it doesn't work that well. But you can try it out if you want to. Maybe it will be helpful for some people. Then we have smoothness, which, smooths it out, but it will sort of make things smaller. Like if you look at the original curve right here, you can see it's pretty close when it's set to 0, but it might be a little chunkier. In this case, it's not that bad, but yeah, then you can, turn it up to make things very smooth. All right, I'm drawing this with my mouse, but I'm gonna draw a character. So we have an arm right here. This one's gonna have fingers, and we'll see how that is handled. And then this one is gonna have a big foot. And then this side, I'm gonna do just sort of like club style hands and feet like that. Okay, so you can see we have a few disconnected pieces right here. And so part of that is because of the voxel size. We can turn the voxel size down, and we can also do things like change the minimum and maximum thickness, and sometimes the accuracy helps too. So let's turn the voxel size down until it gets a little more detailed. You can see like the square size right there, it's adding more faces, and at a certain point it does start connecting. And this will get pretty dense, but later on I'll show you how to use Blender's built-in quad remesher, I think it's called Quadriflow, to fix this up and make it have much lower point count and stuff like that. But yeah, now this looks a little better. It looks a little closer to our original curve, and it works pretty well. We also have things like minimum and maximum thickness, and basically the way that it works right now, minimum thickness is set to 0, which means as this approaches the curve, it's going to basically go down to a radius of 0, and you can turn this up so that points on the very edge still have thickness to them. You can hover over this. It says 1 is the voxel size. So this will make it, if you turn this to 1, you can see that it inflates a little, and it's basically saying like instead of scaling down to 0, scale down to the voxel size right here so that it will always stay close to the mesh. And we can even like reset this to turn it up, and you can see it's already sticking a lot closer compared to when we had it set to 0 like that. So you can turn this up a little bit at a time. You can also turn down maximum thickness if we set this to 1 and turn the maximum thickness down. And with this, 0 is the voxel size. So pretty much if you set the minimum thickness to 1 and the maximum thickness to 0, it will kind of have like a uniform thickness right here. And it's a little more apparent when the voxel size is lower, like 0.05. You can see that it's still sort of inflated and soft, but if you draw something like a big square, it's going to be pretty flat like that. And this is also a good way to explain what the accuracy does. So if we go behind the scenes, what the accuracy is actually doing, how this is actually working is it's scattering a bunch of points. And when you change the accuracy, it's basically not scattering as many right here. So if you turn it down enough, you start to kind of get gaps like that. And then when it turns into a volume and remeshes and stuff, it's just like not as accurate. So when you turn accuracy down, you're making it so that there is a chance for more holes in the model, but it will run a lot faster. So as you can see right here, it's really patchy. And if I set this to like 10, the default, there are no patches. You can just turn it down pretty much until you think it starts looking bad and isn't working right, which with a big simple shape like this, you can turn down a lot further than something complex with thin spots and stuff like that, but we'll just see. And so right around 1 or 1.25, it starts to get holes like that. So you can, you can decide where you want to put it. Usually like as low as you can go is gonna make it more performant. So usually 1 is pretty good for most things, especially when you have the thicknesses set to like pretty normal. Like, you can't see any of the gaps here because the volume is so big. Yeah, that's what accuracy does. And it's going to make the most sense to pay attention to that when you're dealing with something that has like a thickness like this. Yeah, but yeah, play around with minimum and maximum thickness. There's also the option to use the curve radius, which if you're using like a tablet that has like pressure sensitivity, then you can like take that into account. But beyond that, this also lets you do cool things. Like if you say, for instance, you want this part to be flat, as if you set this to 1 and this to 0, but you want the other thing to not be flat, you don't have to create a new object for that. You can just turn on use curve radius and then go into edit mode. We have this whole thing selected. You can either move this directly. And so this is basically just doing what I showed you. It's switching between the default right here and flipping them. So instead of 0 and 1, it's 1 and 0, and it will make this look a lot flatter like that. You can also do Alt S, and that is doing the same thing. You can see even up here how like the number is changing. And I believe you can just press 0 when you're doing that and it will set it for you. But yeah, then we also have mean tilt, which you can do with Control T, and this is going to change the offset basically like per stroke. And just to show you what offset is doing more clearly, you can use it globally like this, but I'll draw from the top to make it a little more apparent what's happening. We have, you know, something like a snowman shape, I guess. So it's very clear that, like, you know, this is thicker, but if we use offset, you can see instead of making it thick in both directions from the center, it's like pushing one way more than the other. And when you're in edit mode using Control T, you can do that per curve, or you can use this. And if you do want to like be very particular about it not hopping over to the other side, going from 0 to 1 is like going to 90 degrees in here. So we can just type in 90 and it will push in the other direction, or negative 90 like that. And this is also a case of switching the direction where this actually matters, because depending on whether you draw something counterclockwise or clockwise like that, when you offset it, you can see they push in different directions. And you might not like this, but you can change it really easily by just selecting that stroke and doing switch direction. And now it, you know, flips to the other side like that. So it's a good thing to know, especially when you're using offset or if you're using extrude, because then the direction really matters and it's going to make a big difference. Okay, so let's talk about when objects get really close to each other. I'm going to press B to box select all of these and then just delete them. And when I bring these close, you can see that because it's looking at the distance to the edge and there is an edge right here, it's actually like getting thinner right here. And you can do some pretty cool things with this if you actually want this sort of reaction, this result. Like if you turn the minimum thickness down quite a bit, like you by default, I made it so it stops at 0, but you can type in a negative number. I can type in like -1 or whatever, and you can make it so that it does like, can draw a little circle and then drag this on top. You can make it so that there's like a circle floating inside of a square. It's like punching it out like that. And then when it approaches 0, it will fuse back together, but still keep the sort of like distance to edge type thing going on. But if you don't want it to do that, if you don't like how it like kind of puckers in that weird way, you can turn on separate strokes, and that will basically make it so each stroke is treated, it's a separate island and they don't fuse together. But maybe you do want them to fuse together, but you don't want that weird distance to edge thing, then you can choose separate strokes and remesh. And it's basically remeshing after it separates everything. So you can get things to merge, which is really nice for, you know, if you wanted to add like fingers to the character over here, you can just delete all this. And I can just like draw, you know, a finger like that and then like duplicate it. And you can see it's pretty scary and spiky, but it is connecting fine. You're not getting weird shrinking over here. We could also just talk about like the shading and the curve resolution. So this is actually easier to show with the flat tool. If you don't resample the curve, it's basically looking at all of the points, the control points along the curve, and it's just connecting those without any of like the smoothing and stuff like that. When you resample it, it's adding points in between to try to match, you know, how curvy it is. And the curve resolution is like the distance between all of the points that it's adding. So if you turn this up, you can see it gets more low res. It's basically checking the distance between points right here. That's what this distance is. So if you want it higher res, you make this lower and it becomes smoother, stuff like that. Set this back to pillow. And then we have, you know, shading. You can have it shade flat like that, shade smooth. I usually just have it set to smooth by angle. Let's switch this to extrude. We'll talk about some of those settings. So you can see by default, extrude is not centered. Like it's extruding in one direction. And so like I said, when you switch the direction, that's going to flip it per curve. Or you can go to the extrude menu and change the offset. You can set it to 0 if you want it in the center, always like that. And I'll just turn off show original. And you can also see this is a lot more low poly compared to the pillow mode, because it's literally just extruding it. It's not remeshing it at all. Unless you want it to mesh, in which case you press the remesh button and it's just going to basically apply a voxel remesh right here, which honestly is like, it's pretty clean. It's just kind of dense. And you also have the same sort of thing with separate strokes. So right now, if I draw something and remesh it without separating the strokes, it will fuse together, compared to you turn on separate strokes and, you know, now it actually separates it. So same deal. Yeah. Then we have the obvious things like we have thickness, which changes like the overall thickness. You can also do that with Alt S, or changing the radius up here. And just like before, the tilt is going to change the offset per stroke, which is pretty nice. And you can do that with Control T as well, like that. Then we have add end caps, which is just going to add, you know, these right here. And this is going to do it for like every curve that you draw. So if I draw something over here like that, it's kind of like a pillar, something like that, which is kind of fun. And you can change the height cap height and cap depth and stuff like that. We also have extrude stroke, which is basically like, instead of filling it completely, it's getting the stroke and then it's extruding that. So it acts a little different. This, I guess, would be good for something like if you want to draw a house like from the top, you could like draw, you know, all of the walls or whatever. Yeah, let's see. You could draw all of the walls, and then I guess you would punch a wall out there. I'll probably add the option to make the curve not cyclic. That might be nice, because I do have that for the stroke tool right here. You can choose to connect it or to have it like, you know, closed or open basically. But yeah, that was my thought behind this one. So you can change the thickness, thicker walls, whatever. But yeah, the extrude tool is pretty straightforward. This, I was thinking, would be pretty good for drawing houses. And this is also really good for using with the surface, because you can, the surface mode, whatever, you can draw a building like this. Let's just flip that like this. You know, you want it to be a big building with multiple stories, change this to surface, and then you can, you know, start drawing on top like that. And I think it ends up being pretty cool. Now, you know, it's like a little factory. You can start drawing on the side and stuff like that. Say like you want some windows, then you can just, yeah, shrink it with Alt S and start duplicating. It's pretty, it's not very like clean the way that I'm doing it, but it's a thing you can do. Like if I wanted to have like a roof right here, I could, let's just draw it up here instead. Okay, so we have a roof. I'll bring it up and I'll extrude it. Let's bring it forward like that. Alt S until it's big enough. We have an overhang. So now we have something like that. We can do the same thing over here, but maybe pull it back a little. And instantly we have, actually, let's flip this around 90 degrees. Better, so much better. Okay, so now we have like kind of an interesting building that I literally just drew. So you can get stuff done pretty quickly with this. Like I did all that in real time, and you have this weird cartoony low poly house. This is what it actually looks like. It's not that bad. It's not great, but it's not that bad. You can obviously, if you want this to be much lower, then you just change the resampling. You can turn this up like that, or you can turn it off completely, and then it becomes a lot more geometric. But yeah, so that's the extrude tool. You know, play around with the remeshing and the separating strokes and all that. Okay, so then we have stroke. Stroke, you know, it's going to show you all the strokes that I drew. A big surprise. You can turn off use radius. So right now it is looking at, you know, basically how thick everything was for like when it was extruding. It's paying attention to that. So if we want everything to be the same size, the same thickness, we can turn this off. It's kind of nice. You can have the stroke have a separate material, which I'll show that with the next one, because it makes more sense when you're kind of combining it with like the stroke and pillow or stroke and flat. But then we have the overall radius. We have the offset, which is basically just going to look at the original curve. And you'll see as I turn this up, it's kind of like pushing it. It makes the most sense, honestly, when you look at the windows. You can see it sort of like pushing in the normal direction, either away from or like inside. Then we have things like if you want to change the taper, you can make it so that the radius completely like goes to 0 at the end like this, and it does that automatically. Or you can make it so that the radius is 1 and it's, you know, just the same thickness throughout, but let's set that to 0. Then we have things like whether you want the taper to be based on the length of the curve or like percentage. So basically it's, if you have it set to percent, it's going to be like 50% right here, which means that like the thickness, it's going to get thickest like around this one right here. And you can turn this down to like something like 10%. Basically, the idea is if you want all of the caps to have the same sort of like length, then you want to set this to length instead. So you can see right here, the cap looks a little shorter. This one looks pointier right here. If you set that to length, then the cap size will be the same no matter the length of the curve. So you kind of get to decide that yourself. Then we have the tip shape right here. So you can make it more round or like pointy or whatever like that. Then we have the center, which is just going to look at the center center and like push it more in one direction like that. This would be nice if you want to have like hair or something. Just have this set to 50 and then just push it so the center is completely on one side, and then everything will, you know, get thin only on one side. Then we have twist, which is just going to twist this around, but this honestly makes more sense when you're looking at it shaded flat. Turn this up to something high like 1,000 or whatever, and you can see it's twisting now. But right now this is using the circle as the profile shape, and you can kind of change the resolution of that. So instead this would be like a triangle. I have it set to 6 by default. But we have line also, which is just going to be like flat like a ribbon, and I'll turn the twist down so it's just completely flat. And then we also have a star, which is sort of like whipped cream or frosting or something like that. And then we have these other options down here for the scale is going to push it in one direction. Then we have inner radius, which is only for the star. You can see that like part of it is moving and like every other point is moving. Yeah, so you can make it like really tight or like only a little. And then the bevel is again only for the star, and you can kind of see right here when you add a bevel like what is happening. It's like making it smoother like that, and then you can change the bevel size. So you have a few options with the stroke. Honestly, what I like to use it for the most is just you press the remesh button and turn off separate strokes. You can draw some like interesting shapes that like blend together. I'll turn on the curve radius also. So then we have this like liquid metal type thing, which I think is pretty cool looking. Or you can have it so the strokes separate, but that's not as fun. But yeah, you get this cool like volume sort of look. And I guess it still works with like the tip radius. So if you want, you can make it more like this. Yeah, I really like how the blobbiness of the stroke works. And this is probably, if you want something to draw onto a surface, using this brush, or this mode rather, is probably like the best one to use. So I'll set this to surface and just draw like this, and you can see that it should stick to the surface pretty well. Compared to if you have something like pillow, it's not going to like conform as well. In this, it actually conformed pretty well, but a lot of the time you end up with some like strange sort of interactions. Like it's all being triangulated under the hood and it doesn't really know how to bend exactly. But when you're using the stroke, it works pretty well. That is the curve. And then pretty much everything else, except for when you're using grease pencil, has like a combination of options. So if we set this to a pillow and stroke, it's going to give you all the same options, but with the pillow and the stroke options at the same time. So pretty easy to understand. You also have the option to make curve cyclic, which is just going to connect it right there. Also, probably if you want to use both at the same time using the curve radius, I would say it's probably going to be better most of the time when you're not using the radius. And then you can do things like change the radius like that, and it's only affecting the pillow instead of affecting both at the same time, which is going to be kind of strange. You can also have a separate stroke material, so if you want it to be outlined in black, then it is much easier to. Yeah, and then we have a flat and stroke, which is the same thing except it's using flat instead, which has no options because it's you're literally just drawing, you know, a shape and it turns it into an n-gon. But you do still have access to like the stroke options if you want to do interesting stuff with that. Yeah, so I'll talk about grease pencil and how to use grease pencil options, and then we're going to talk about converting things into a mesh. So let's add in grease pencil. So Shift A, grease pencil, we can do blank right there, and then we can go into draw mode. You can also access that up here. I did Control Tab to get in there, and then, you know, draw whatever you want. Usually I turn the strength up so it's not like faded and stuff, and then we can add the geometry nodes, add the draw model tool, and then we just want to change this from curve to grease pencil. That's the whole process to setting it up. It's literally the same exact thing, except you have to make sure object type is set to grease pencil. So then, you know, you can show the original, it shows the grease pencil. And if you change the radius in here, or if you're using something with pressure sensitivity, then, you know, using the curve radius is actually going to give you different results. It's going to make more sense if we set it to like extrude, and let's see. So now you can see that like this is very thin and this is thick. I'll turn this off. And if I turn the radius up, then it's going to be even thicker. So yeah, this is definitely different compared to doing it with the curve, but then you have access to like a bunch of cool grease pencil options, control and left click and drag. That's how you erase things. I like to change this to erase stroke, and that will erase the whole stroke like that. I just think it's like a little easier to work that way. A cool thing about grease pencil is you have access to vertex colors and also cool like effects and modifiers and stuff. And you also have layers. So you have a few different options, and at the very bottom you have, you know, grease pencil options. We should also change this grease pencil vertex color. I want to put all of these shapes on a different layer. So let's go to, I think it's this one right here at the very top. You can add a few different layers. Let's select this other one. Let's draw a triangle. Okay. And then this third one, we can draw like a circle or whatever. Okay. So now we have a few different layers. And because I already set this to grease pencil vertex color, we have the option to change the layer color right here. So you can, you know, we know this is the first layer. This is the second layer. We have red, and then this one is like dark green, or, you know, a green. So using these right here lets you change things based on the layer, which is pretty cool. We also have the option to use vertex colors, which you can do by pressing Control Tab and going into vertex paint. And then you can just use this up here. So I'll just like make this black, and you can see, let's turn the strength up also. You can see as I draw on it, it should change color. Now the stroke changes color all along, but the inside face is going to, it's getting the color from the stroke. So it's basically just averaging the whole thing. And so if you want this to be completely black, you have to make the whole stroke black like that. Let's make this gray like that and make this white. All right. And you can see it kind of does that automatically. Basically what it's doing is it's checking to see if there are any vertex colors. And if there's not, it uses these over here. But if it does have vertex colors, then it uses those instead. And then if you want to erase it, I believe that's just Control and then, you know, draw, left click. So you can like erase it and it goes back to normal like that. Like, let's just make these white, and I'll use vertex colors to paint this so I can show you the vertex color smoothing. So I'll just do that real quick. This one's blue, red, and green. Okay, now if I go into edit mode and put these close together, and we should switch this to a different mode. Let's just set this to like pillow and want to remesh it like that. So you can see it's mixing together, but it's like kind of like gross looking. And that's when vertex color smoothing comes in handy, is you can just turn this up to smooth it, and it will kind of make the colors blend together a little better. You can turn it up all the way too if you want it to get like real crazy. I think it looks pretty cool visually, especially compared to when it's just set to 0 and it just kind of looks like crap. But yeah, then we also have the layer offset. So it's basically looking at all of the layers here, and it's moving them like kind of all at the same time. So if we move this on the Y axis, you can see each layer is going to, you know, the first one is not going to move, and then the second one moves, and then this one moves like even more. So it's kind of like moving in a diagonal line, I guess, like something like that. Yeah. And so this is pretty nice for if you wanted to draw things, like if you wanted to draw a face and you wanted all the features to kind of be like on different layers so they're on top of each other, then you could do that. I'll do a flat and stroke, and then I'll just work on this layer right here and just start like deleting everything. So we can draw the head, and then maybe on this layer we can draw the eyes, and you can see it should already be like on top like that. And I'll draw like a mouth also, and then we can draw like the pupils on this layer. So yeah, we just have something like that, and then we can space it apart over here after the fact like that. So it's all sort of like set on top, and then we can change it over here. So we got blue, we have white, and you know, we want the pupils to be black or whatever. So we have something like this. You can change the outline material. So it's like kind of freaky looking, but then you can also, if you want, you can come into like vertex paint and you can make the mouth like red or something like a mouth, I guess, just so we can see a little better. We can do this. Yeah, that's what we got. Could also do that with like the pillow. It's gonna look extra crazy, but it's fine. We'll set this to 1, set this to 0, and then this is gonna make a little more sense why we would want it to be offset. We have like this. I should probably turn remesh off. That way it's not trying to remesh it at the same time. But yeah, then you can make it actually like sit on top snugly like that. And if we don't, then you can't see anything because of like the thickness of the head. good. But yeah, so yeah, that's Grease Pencil. And then you can also do cool things like, you know, you can animate frame by frame. If you set this to auto key and then move over here, then you have, and then you draw something different and keep going. This is only going to be for like that one layer. So you can see now frame 1, we have this, frame 2, we have that, frame 3, we have this. So you can actually animate with this and have like an animating mesh instead of it just being Grease Pencil, which is pretty neat. And then if you don't want this, you can just like delete these frames. Honestly, if you're going to do this, it probably makes more sense to use the dope sheet and set this to Grease Pencil. I think that's going to give you like the most options, because then you can see all of the layers right here and decide which parts you're like animating. And then beyond that, you also have other modifiers that you can use. So we have like deform, you can add noise. You would just want to make sure that the noise is being added first. You can see already it's being pushed around quite a bit. And then when you press play, we have this like subtle motion, or you can like turn it up to the max. You can add more noise, things like that. Have this this wiggly bit. So I didn't even have to like animate anything. Didn't have to add more frames, and it already is like an animated 3D model. You know, you can see it. It's 3D. It's animated. I know there's like a build modifier, which is fun, and that basically is just going to like draw it out for you. So that's pretty cool as well. You might have to mess with the settings to make it not be as glitchy, maybe. Okay, yeah, so let's talk about turning this into a mesh now. So I'll leave the Grease Pencil here, and I will add, you know, another curve. So we have, or another example. Okay, let's thicken this up like that. All right, so we got a little character right there. I am going to duplicate these and then hide them, so we have some to go back to in case we mess up or whatever. Okay, so this is a curve, and we can literally just right click, convert to mesh. And this is basically going to remove all of the modifiers and just make it so that they turn it into a mesh. Like it's visually going to be the same, except I guess for the random color, for whatever reason, changed to something else. Now for a Grease Pencil, you can't do that. You can't just right click it and wait, right click, convert to mesh. Oh yeah, see, when you convert to mesh, it just like kind of breaks it. Even with keep original, it's basically just duplicating it. So basically what you need to do, it's pretty annoying, but you add in a new object. I'll just add like a mesh plane. And then there's this Grease Pencil to mesh. We can just drag this on, and then you just select the object that you want. You can select this. And now even if we hide this Grease Pencil, you can see it still looks like it's there because this is referencing it. It's basically making a duplicate, but it's doing it stored in this plane instead. So now we can just do like we did with the curve. We can right click it, convert to mesh, and now you can go into edit mode in this, you know, editable as a mesh. So it's kind of a roundabout solution. It's a little annoying, but like this is just how it works right now with Blender. So obviously this is not going to be like, or maybe it's not obvious, I don't know. This isn't going to be very good for like animating. If you wanted to rig this up, like you could and it would work, but sometimes the meshes will get like even more dense in here. Like, you know, I could subdivide that and then convert it to a mesh, and now this is like real dense. Let's actually give this a save in case it crashes, because I really don't want to record this again. I have tested this with Quadremesher, which is a paid add-on, and it's kind of expensive. It's like, I want to say it's like over $100. For me, it's worth it because I've been using it a lot, but I don't expect anybody to be like buying this. I don't have like an affiliate code or anything like that. It works great with this. Just to show you like what we're working with, this is what it looks like right now. I'll turn this down to like 500 or something and then just remesh it. And then this is what you get in return, and it's all quads, so you can like add a subdivision surface modifier, and it looks even better now. Like it's smoothing just fine. So this works really well, but Blender does already have like a quad, I think it's called Quadriflow. If you go to this object data properties, it's like a little triangle, go to remesh. You have the option to voxel remesh, which is basically what this already is, except I subdivided it. But we also have this quad option, and this is, yeah, using Quadriflow remesh. So if we select this, click that button, then we have some other options up here. I haven't used this a whole lot. I've basically just tried to test it with this. So before we actually do this, let's just see how many points this has so we can compare. So verts, it has like 33,000 right here. Let's just leave it set to the default. and just see how it handles it. Sometimes it will hang at 50 for a while, which is kind of annoying. I'll just like jump ahead and see if it works, and I'll let you know. So yeah, it's been hanging at 50% for a few minutes. I'm just going to cancel it and we'll see if I can get it working. This time it actually worked fine. Basically what I did is, before I was using 4.4 and I noticed there was a new stable release, 4.4.1. So it worked fine this time. Like, it was really quick, 3 seconds maybe. And this is what it gave me. So it's still pretty dense. Let's see if I can get it even better. But yeah, so maybe 4.4, it's a little bugged or something. 4.4.1 seemed to work fine. Let's set this to like 500 and see how it does. Okay, yeah, so it's much better. Pretty quick, works pretty well. When you have things like really thin spots, it's probably not going to handle that nearly as well. And just see how it handles it. Quadremesh, 500. Honestly, it's still not that bad. We'll put a subdivision surface on top. That's pretty good, honestly, for, yeah, it was really fast, works really well. It's free, it's already built into Blender. I do really like Quadremesher, and I recommend it if you're the type of person who maybe you're making money from Blender already, or maybe you just have like the income, you can afford it, and you think you're going to be remeshing stuff a lot, and this just like isn't cutting it for you. But before you do that, definitely look up other options. I know there are some, I can't remember the names, because I haven't tested a lot, but there are some other good free ones, like external programs and stuff. So for anybody worrying about like, oh no, I can't use this because it produces really dense geometry or whatever, like Quadremesher works pretty good. Let's just like test it on this just because I'm curious now, because last time it was kind of like, you know, getting kind of buggy and stuff for me. So remesh this. Okay, so yeah, when it's more detailed, you're probably gonna have to turn the face count up a little higher. Like if I set this to 4,000, that'll probably work. So 4,000 worked a little better, but it's having trouble dealing with like the fingers and stuff. So yeah, like your mileage may vary. For this, it worked really well. For this, not so much. Like maybe it's because of the bubble. I don't know. I got rid of the bubble and it worked a little better. This is set to 1,000. It's not terrible. It's a little weird down there. So hopefully this is everything you need to know about the Draw Model tool. I hope you enjoy it. If you have suggestions for like ways it could be better, I guess leave those in the comments, and have a good one.